Greetings, everyone. It's good to have you in this space. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon where you are hailing from. I'm the Reverend Jill Olds, the director of the Yale Youth Ministry Institute at Yale Divinity School. And the YMI is very pleased to welcome all of you to today's gathering entitled Spiritual Care for Young People in the Climate Crisis with Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho. This is our third gathering for this year's YMI Lunch Lab series, and we have people joining us from across the country, even some siblings from other regions of the world today. And whether this is your first event with us or we're well known to you, we're delighted to have you here. For our time today, Reverend Aho will speak to us. We'll have a breakout time with breakout sessions and then a brief Q&A time at the end of their presentation. We ask that you please remain muted throughout the session, but we will also be monitoring the chat window. So if you have a question, please feel free to type it in there at any time. Our office has a great staff. I'd like to introduce them to you quickly and thank them for their work. The YMI falls under the purview of the Center for Continuing Education at YDS. So we have Kelly Morrissey, the managing director for the center, and we are blessed to have Megan Lukens, our communications coordinator. Thank you, both of you, for all that you do and for who you are. If you are new to us at the Youth Ministry Institute, we invite you to peruse our website when you get a free chance. That's yaleyouthministryinstitute.org. We have a whole array of resources on there. We have curricula for your youth. We have training modules for youth leaders. We have discussion forums. We have over 1,000 video clips and lectures given by the world's leading youth ministry experts, folks obviously in the field. We have resources for anti-racism work. We have resources for youth working through mental health struggles. We have mission and outreach endeavors, links to other resources, the works. All of our offerings are available there for free, so please do check out our website. And please look there too for our upcoming events. We follow YDS's school calendar, so this will be our last gathering for 2023. We'll regroup in the new year with a webinar gathering in early February, early March, and then an in-person retreat on mental health in April. So please check out our website for details on all of those things. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce you all to Reverend Aho. Reverend Talitha Amadea Aho is a chaplain at UCSF Benioff's Children's Hospital in Oakland and a minister member of the Presbytery of San Francisco. She is the author of the recently published In Deep Waters, Spiritual Care for Young People in a Climate Crisis, where she expounds upon her time as pastor at Montclair Presbyterian Church, the largest Presbyterian congregation in Oakland, as she bore responsibilities for children and youth programming. She has been in ministry to the young since she was old enough to qualify as a chaperone herself, both at church camps and churches on the East Coast, and with the nonprofit organization Children of Uganda. Underneath her work lies a seminal question: how does one offer spiritual care to young people, specifically around the issues of climate change, so pressing as youth consider both their present and their future? Reverend Aho, welcome. We are delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and excited to meet all of you as well, hear from you in our breakout rooms and group shares, and to go together into the depths. So my climate awakening happened in the middle of fire season. You can see in my virtual background here, you can see the steeple of our church, Montclair Presbyterian Church, behind this majestic California live oak. And it may look like a beautiful sunset, but this day, this photo was taken about noon. It was a really hard fire season, and this was a really apocalyptic day where the sky was orange to red all day long. When I moved to California in 2006, we did not have fire seasons. Sure, we had droughts and floods, but not months of unbreathable air. When I moved to California, I didn't know about the air quality index or how to choose a mask based on the AQI. So this picture was taken in 2020 on a day in September when the air quality was so bad that the street lights never went off all day. And that was a day for many Californians when they first woke up to the climate apocalypse. I was already about 2 years into that awakening myself. And that had started in a previous fire season. And it wasn't my first awakening. I was already active ecologically. I was reducing my carbon footprint as I was taught in college. And I was going out of my way to recycle and compost, which I had been doing since childhood. But this was a different awakening. It was a real wake up call when the teenagers in my church asked, and I quote, "So, what's God doing in all of this? Are they just throwing up their hands and being like, time to wreck the world, guys, have fun?" The teenagers of our church were in profound spiritual crisis because of the climate chaos around them. And I, as their pastor, did not have answers that satisfied them. I need to turn on my screen share. Here we go. So that's my virtual background there that you're seeing. So I'm no longer working at that church. And I don't have a youth group to ask me those existential questions anymore. I feel I really miss it. It's a kind of a phantom pain, like it's been amputated from me. Like, where is my youth group? But for 18 months now, I've been a hospital chaplain at a pediatric trauma center. It's really different work, but it harmonizes well with what I did before. Here at the hospital, I'm studying the depths of grief and the strength of human tenacity, utter sorrow, and sheer grit. And I know that God called me to this for a reason. And I think the reason may be something we can all learn about how to survive in the climate crisis. And here is my book, which combines a bit of both. In this book, I'm using the kind of spiritual care assessments that are used by hospital chaplains, and I'm applying those to conversations with youth about the climate crisis. So can you please take a moment to introduce yourselves just in the chat for now, and we'll have spoken shares later. Oh, and I need to figure out where I can see the chat. There it goes. Okay. First, tell me where you are. I am originally a New Yorker. My ancestors were those who colonized the lands of the Lenape people. But for 17 years now, I've been living in California on the lands of the Ohlone people. Where are you? Can you just put that in the chat, please? Hello, Chicago. Where are you? Sacramento, hi. Columbus, Ohio, Central Massachusetts, Denver, Connecticut. I just saw Australia enter the waiting room, so let's get her in. Arkansas, woo, we are really all over. Thank you. Thank you. And keep putting your location in, and please also add your relationship to youth. Are you a youth leader? Are you a pastor? Are you a parent? Are you a young person yourself? What is your relationship to youth? And keep putting the locations in too. Hello, pastors and youth ministers and parents and teaching undergrads. And work with all ages. Those of you who are joining us, just put your location and your relationship to youth in the chat as we go. Oh, we have a retired, congratulations, environmental justice teams and Minister of Faith Formation. And please add also, what is your generation? This matters because we grew up with different messages in our foundational years. So I am an elder millennial. I played computer games in middle school, but they were really grainy, like really pixelated. Also, I grew up believing that recycling would save the world. So that's how we're a little different from others. Hello, Gen Z. Hello, millennials. And hello, boomers. Gen Y? Gen Y, okay. Hello, everybody. We've got a big range of all these things. We've got a range of locations, a range of jobs and generations. A millennial with a question mark, that's somebody who's like not sure if they like being a millennial or not. Oh, cool. All right. Um, now this is a different thing. As we introduce ourselves to one another, I want you to take a moment and think about where your relationship to the climate crisis is. We all have different relationships, right? And this is a sloppy diagnostic tool. I made it up and I wouldn't use it in research, but I'm just kind of asking for a temperature check. When you think about your climate anxiety, climate activism, climate advocacy, maybe climate doom, I wonder how much of your life that takes up. So I made this scale from 0 to 5. I think that none of you are zeros because you're here, okay? 1 is getting aware, and I think I had been a 1 or maybe a 2 before the youth group awakened me. And they pushed me immediately to 3 and eventually to 4. But by the end of my time at the church, I was a 4. I was engaging with the climate at least daily. But now I'm back to about a 3 because it's not daily for me anymore, although it might become because I'm now the chair of my hospital's green team. Oh, and level 5. So this is not a more is better kind of scale. 5 is where you're flooded. You're unable to disconnect even for a day. So for me, every time we've had a bad fire season here in California, I have stayed at 5 until the air cleared. And like this year, that was just a couple of days. But in 2020, I think that was 6 to 8 weeks. So if it's like toes in the water at 1, jumping in at 3, and drowning at 5, where are you? See so many numbers coming in the chat for 4.5, 4, 3, 3, 3, 5, 4, 3, 2.5. Okay. Yeah. And thinking about the youth in your lives, I wonder if they've told you about where they are. Of course, we can't really analyze them on their own behalfs, but you know, you may know some youth very well. And I wonder where they would put themselves on this scale. I'm gonna put now going to youth in the chat so that we can see. Do you know about any of the youth in your lives where you think they are? There's some 2s. Yeah. 3 to 5s, some 5s. In my church, there were a lot of 5s. And then there were also some who vacillated really fast from 5 to 0. So they would just go back and forth between I can't disconnect to I won't connect. And some people have people in their group that are on both ends of the scale, both extremes. Yeah. Everyone over 15 has a low level dread all the time. That is quite true. Yeah. And so we have ranges there. Yeah. Not sure. Florida is so weird. Well, it may be different for us of different generations. I think that's really important to say. So there are some of us who grew up with this basic idea that if you do the right thing, it's going to be okay. And that is profoundly been taken away from the young people today. There's no sense that if you just recycle or just reduce your climate carbon emissions, that things will be okay. No, it's much more desperate. You could say, oh, all you have to do is restructure all the systems of the world, and then you'll be okay. It's such a taller order. And youth, because of their developmental stage, are extra vulnerable. Coming of age during the climate crisis is like trying to learn how to swim during a flood. Because youth are existentially open, emotionally vulnerable, busy forming. It's a lot of chaos in which to form. How are we defining youth? So I wrote my book about Generation Z, who are now getting into high school and above. But I know that because of our audience here, we're doing youth ministry, and so for some of you, your context includes middle school or even younger, and that's fine. We can talk about them all. But the teen and preteen years are developmentally difficult. And we can phrase it either way, like negatively. I hear sometimes at the hospital, social workers are saying they are unable to moderate their strong emotions or things like that. But also positively, youth have the gift of feeling things fully in a way that grown-ups can't always do. I tend to see it the positive way, but still, while celebrating the emotional intensity of youth, I also have to know this leaves them extra vulnerable to crisis. And so spiritual crises are when we come to crisis on existential issues such as who am I? What is the world? What is God? What is important? Where should I go? What should I do? How do I get along with the people around me? The spiritual crisis is something that can be a gift and an opportunity, but you have to be met with love and care and some skill to get somebody carefully through their spiritual crisis without allowing them to completely fall apart beyond the ability to reintegrate. And I always ask, is the church equipped to meet people in spiritual crisis? Climate crisis causes a spiritual crisis, and our churches are not always ready to receive people in crisis. As a hospital chaplain, hospital chaplains are trained in it. It's what we do all day. We find different kind of crises around the hospital all the time, especially depending on your staffing level. My staffing level is low, so I only get to do crisis work. Our church was having one of those leadership retreats where we're trying to be like, how can we as a church be better? How can we welcome newcomers better? And the mood in the room was so light, and everybody was talking about things like, oh, let's make more clear the tradition where you give a newcomer a red cup at coffee hour versus a white cup and the red cup means you're willing to be approached for conversation and maybe a little packet of info or something like that too. And we were just going on this kind of like bubbly conversation, and somebody spoke up and dropped it down so much. He said, guys, I don't think people are coming to church for that. I don't think that's what's going to make the difference. If they're just looking for like a nice encounter and a happy day, they'll go to a concert in the park, right? People come to church because they're in spiritual crisis. And he told his own story, which was very vulnerable, and we felt honored to receive it. Like, he told the story of when he came to church, it was because he was actually struggling with alcoholism. He was actually having a hard time in his family relationships. Everything was hard. And so he was coming to church desperately seeking help. I wonder if your churches are good places to cry, or your other ministry settings. My home church, Broadway Presbyterian in New York City, it was a very good place to cry. I remember as a teenager, raising a personal prayer request for a physical pain of mine at prayer time, and immediately getting these side hugs and like whispered extra prayers from the people next to me in the pews. And our youth groups, are they good places to cry? Youth groups can be so different from church, and youth ministry settings can be so different. There often is a chance to connect emotionally. It's less likely to be one person speaking and everybody listening, but we can really miss these opportunities too. I distinctly remember one of my youth group's failures. There was a teenager who was new in town, who had attended church that morning. And I, from my position at the front of church, had seen him weeping while we sang, "There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole." The morning church service was a safe place for him to have feelings, but as it happened, there were actually 0 teenagers in church that morning. And he came to youth group that evening. And I just watched in despair as the youth group ran off the rails. It was one of the biggest nights we had. There were 27 youth there in a room that was comfortable for 15. And there were several new friends and lots of crushes and gossip and intensity and loud laughter. And we never had a moment of solemnity that was anything like what I imagined that teenager needed. He never came back, but I never forgot that. We are all missing out on a big opportunity if we can't help people in their spiritual crisis. And the climate crisis is causing a spiritual crisis that hits youth hard. So even more than usual, more than the regular crises of being teenagers, we need to expect that the youth are having their own existential crises on a regular basis. I want to read a little bit from my book, just because these are words that need to not be summarized. I need to give them word for word. This was an exchange I had with a college student who wrote more confidently than she spoke, and so I want to honor her words. Her name's Linnea, and she was studying. She was studying to be like a wildlife biologist. And I had started to bring up these topics, and she wrote me her thoughts. "I'm planning to devote my career to saving species, but sometimes it feels not even like I'm fighting an uphill battle, but like we've already lost the battle, and I'm trying to salvage the scraps of what's left over. It's really painful for me to think about." When I had my fieldwork fellowship, I did informational interviews with employees there. I asked them how they deal with climate grief when their careers are so focused on the destruction of our environment, hoping they could offer me some advice. The advice that felt most emotionally resonant came from a woman who told me that working on climate change is distressing and depressing, and there's not really a way around it. She told me that she and many other biologists who work on climate change issues deal with a lot of pain, and it's just a choice I have to make on whether I'm willing to take that on. It was a sad answer to hear, but I felt relief to find someone to tell me that hard truth, and who seemed to have dealt with a similar grief to mine. To me, nature feels like the core of my identity. My life centers around nature. My career path is in conservation. My hobbies are hiking, backpacking, birding, and plant identification. My art is mostly paintings of nature. For me, it's hard to separate who I am from my love for nature. Climate grief is intertwined with my own sense of self, which can be very painful. Growing up, I used to believe in a more traditional sense of God, but I lost that in my teenage years. These days, I view nature itself as the divine. So for me, it feels almost like God is dying. So I really thank Linnea for putting to words her spiritual crisis that clearly, for me to understand about her, but also to give me permission to share that with the world in my book. And I'd like us to take a deep breath and take that in, the depths of that spiritual crisis. And as we think about like how do we help people in crisis? How do we meet people in crisis? I would like to just ask, why don't people talk about this more? What are the barriers that leave people like Linnea feeling alone, and distressed? And why is the climate itself so hard to talk about? And you can put something in the chat. You can also raise a hand and speak out loud if you want to. What makes this range of topics hard to talk about? I'm a chaplain. I'm comfortable with silence, so I'm going to wait. Why don't people talk about this more? Knowing there is no good answer seems unsolvable. Fatigue. Maybe we've tried talking about it and then felt exhausted by it. It can seem so large and challenging. It's hard to know where to start. Ooh, when your anxiety matches their anxiety too, it's hard to offer a calm presence when you have the same anxiety. Thank you for raising up that climate change is the most divisive topic in America. It's very divisive. Oh, also some people, most people maybe, aren't comfortable sitting with rage and anger and letting it flow into actions. You know, we just want to clean it up, don't we? Escape that rage and anger. It gets partisan so quickly. Yeah. And the climate has been strategically partisanized, I think, because it would be a unifying issue if if it weren't pushed like that by politics to divide us. It's so big. Timothy Morton would call it a hyper object. I love that phrase. I've never heard it, and I'm gonna appreciate that. A hyper object. It feels so out of reach. Feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. Generational pressure. Older generations in churches don't want to hear it or don't care. Not interesting too, because those older generations in the church, they want the young ones in there, don't they? But they don't want to talk about what the young people want to talk about. And yes, the problem is so huge that it is hard to know that I can make a difference. Meanwhile, just living in a first world culture means I'm making the problem worse. You know, there's that sense of individual guilt, which I will talk about because individual guilt is one of the most difficult things that's kind of been programmed into this strategically. There's a lot of reasons why we don't talk about this. There's a lot of reasons why it's hard to bring it up. And these are the things, so much focus is on individuals and not community. Yeah, we might just kind of go into our own internet research, our algorithm, which is different than somebody else's, or we just focused on our household and not on the community around us. And it feels like there are more immediate crises in our own lives and direct communities too. Yes, there's like not enough food or housing today, and crises that seem easier to address in the short term. Yes, we can try to focus on short term versus long term. Thank you. Somebody put in the chat, I do bring the subject up often, and it is received so very differently from person to person. Yeah, thank you for your courage and continuing to bring it up often. But all the things you have named are real reasons that end up leaving people like Linnea alone and distressed. A kind of isolation because of all these factors that make it hard to talk about and to come together on. I'm going to bring up the difference before we go on. I want to bring up the difference between self-care and community care. I work in a really traumatizing, difficult job as a hospital chaplain. People always talk about self-care. Oh, you got to do something nice for yourself, and make sure you go to therapy, and make sure you get a massage on a regular basis and things like that. Those are all self-care, and they're also commodified forms of self-care. Climate workers face a lot of fatigue, a lot of trauma, a lot of distress. And when I say climate workers, I mean the whole range, whether you're starting to volunteer with a community organization, or like Linnea, you are a wildlife biologist who is looking at extinctions on the daily basis. And self-care is a really, self-care is not a solution. Self-care is, of course, something we can recommend, and we really need community care at the scope of this, the enormity of the climate crisis means that people cannot self-care their way through the distress about this. It is just too much to prescribe some self-care to the people that are having distress. We really need community care. We need community discussions. We need community checking in on each other. We need community building shared vocabulary, and just spending like that soothing time in community with one another, with that openness that we can build. This is a really important place where the church and the ministries of the church can make a difference, because people struggling under a heavy load of distress, of trauma, of emotional overwhelm and isolation don't need to just be told, patted on the back and offered, oh yeah, you should get a massage, which is then commodified as a consumer good that you can pay a certain amount of money for, right? And making it accessible to some and less accessible to others. So we need community care. We need this to be our mindset as the church and her ministries, to create places of mutual community care, to replace the thing that the culture around us is prescribing. We need to deepen our emotional capacity together. And this feels like the heart of what I want to talk with you about today, especially with those of you who are in churches and in ministries where you're encountering the young people who are the most distressed by the climate crisis. We need so badly to deepen our own emotional capacity to match that of the young people who are with us now. So they have this deep level of distress. We need to deepen our emotional capacity so that we can be with them in that deep level. And these young people may be with us now, they may be in our churches now, but they will leave us, and they will leave disappointed if we can't deepen our emotional capacity to meet them where they are. Now, you're youth workers, so you have a certain amount of capacity, right? You you know what it's like to gear up your energy for, we're gonna play games or whatever that is. You know you have to ramp it up to meet them where they are. But I think the going down and going deep is often a missing piece in our own education and our own preparation for ministry. Many leaders, whether a professional or volunteer, we've not gone through any deliberate preparation to have increased emotional capacity. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to do it today. I'm going to introduce you to the Climate Emotions Scale, which, if you're not following Queer Brown Vegan on Instagram, I recommend it. Isaias Hernandez developed this, and I will be talking you through it. This is a range of feelings. Feelings are more than just good and bad. There's a whole range of complicated emotions that people may be experiencing with regard to the climate crisis. So I'm going to start with you, Tiara, up there in the pink on the top. You, Tiara, the Greek scholars notice the U at the beginning, which means good or well, wellness. So this is the kind of wellness and interconnectedness that we feel with the earth, the feeling of the interconnectedness of the whole. We may have a positive feeling when it happens. We see or even just not just see or understand, but we feel the interconnectedness of the environment and ourselves. The boundaries between us and the rest of nature are obliterated, if just for a time, and we have a deep sense of peace and connectedness. It's an intensely spiritual feeling, and it's totally what we're going for at like church retreats and camps and conferences, right? It's like why we prioritize keeping beautiful spaces available for retreats. We did a lot of regular retreats, and there was one where we had this chapel service in an outdoor, like stone and wood chapel with the river running this way and the river running that way. And one of the teenagers described it. It's like nature is hugging you. And that's the feeling of you, Tiara. In the purple, soliphilia is the love for place. And this is the love and appreciation for a location, for a bioregion that is deeply rooted in interconnectedness. It's like a mutual and deep embedded relationship with your home environment, especially where you cultivate or regenerate or construct healing practices that are circular, like where you take care of the earth and the earth takes care of you. If you farm, if you hike, if you are otherwise deeply attuned to a particular place, when you know intimately the needs of the rivers and the creatures around you, this kind of love grows. Just a quick story from the hospital. I was providing spiritual care to a Native American family who was really missing home. And I tried to use my normal lines that I do for people who are missing home. And they said, come on, it's just not the same for a settler. You just don't have the same relationship to land. And it's true. When you have that deep knowledge of the land and a deep connection that goes back to the land, soliphilia is much stronger than for those of us who experience a kind of disconnection from the land. We might be more likely to save this feeling for like parks and recreation spaces, but at best we could feel it for any part of our local environment. And the Bible, especially the Old Testament, was written by people who knew their land intimately, who had soliphilia on their land. So solastalgia, next in the blue, is the sorrow for place. It's the anxiety and sorrow a person feels when their natural home environment is impacted, especially when it's their home. When home environments are altered, it affects the people on a physical level and a psychological level. We feel the pain and sorrow of our place. I kind of think about what the Psalm talks about when the Hebrew people hung up their harps on the river of Babylon and wept because they remembered Zion, which was now in ruins. This is the deep feeling of sorrow we feel when our favorite forest burns in a fire or our neighborhood is damaged in floods. I also want to point out, though, that it can be felt in the marching along of capitalism as well, because sometimes neighborhoods are abandoned, not because anything happened to them, but because they failed to turn enough profits. And I also want to point out that soliphilia and solastalgia are connected. So if you're not deeply connected to your land to the point of feeling soliphilia, you might not be deeply connected enough to have solastalgia when that place is damaged. Eco-anxiety in green is the anxiety for Earth, especially anxiety about the future of the natural environment. We worry about the disasters that are set to happen as the climate crisis worsens, rising carbon emissions, melting of glaciers, deforestation, ocean collapse, and increasing global temperature. They lead to our increased anxiety level. And these are all very big things about which we have very little control. So it's easy for anxiety to spiral out to a level that's not usually seen by psychologists who are trained to deal with anxieties over more personal sized issues. So this kind of anxiety can be very disabling. In the turquoise, ecophobia is the detachment of response and action. Ecophobia is when we have fear about the planet being unlivable in the future. Fear about what that will look like, feel like, be like for us. And I want to offer a little clarification here, because people of privilege, people of the global north, often fear living in, quote, unlivable circumstances. But those very circumstances may not be future, but already present to people in the global south. What I mean is the things that cause horror when we imagine them in our future, like, quote, unlivable temperatures, already are happening to somewhere else, and generally to those most impacted by poverty. But ecophobia happens when we think about it and get a sense of horror and then want to withdraw in fear. We emotionally detach from the earth and the actions that could help it at this point. Yellow is eco-guilt. And I said I'd get back to this a little bit. It's the regret of knowing that you can or you could have done more. It's the feeling when you feel you could have done more to help the earth. I also want to call it sometimes self-blame, because a healthier response would be to focus on external systems that were in play. Like if an oil company CEO were to have eco-guilt, I would not redirect them. But for most ordinary people, we do need some redirection of our eco-guilt. Guilt is good to address in church because we have a relationship with sin and forgiveness and grace, right? But sometimes it's better to redirect it instead of dealing with it head on, because a lot of people experience it far out of perspective. And I just want to say the corporations want you to feel that. They want you to feel so responsible for the styrofoam you purchased and the trip you took, instead of putting the responsibility back on the ones who are making the big decisions on behalf of everybody. It's just important to not let people get swamped by that guilt, because that's really, really strategic for those who would like to continue polluting, would be for us to take our own personal responsibility over everything and take it out of proportion. In orange, eco-grieving, the tears for earth. Grief is not linear. There are stages of grief and it can be very different. It's what we feel when we have sadness, anger, disbelief, shock about the physical disappearance, the degradation, and the death of species, ecosystems, and landscapes. Climate grief is notably said by researchers to be disenfranchised grief. That's grief that is not publicly known or talked about. You may not even be able to get appropriate support from a therapist on this because they may not have experienced it themselves. So people are encouraged to form support networks at this time. And this is something that churches can do very well. To have a support group about climate grief allows people to exit that isolation and disenfranchisement of the eco grief. Terra trauma is the pain of the earth. And this is a sudden grief or sudden pain you experience when you're witnessing a traumatic environmental change. It's like an acute earth-based existential trauma that happens in the moment. It happens when we have land destruction or forest fires, floods or tornadoes or oil spills and evacuations and displacements. And you can experience it firsthand, or also you can experience it vicariously through videos and photos. And it can result in the same things any other kind of trauma can bring us, like flashbacks or dissociation and physical symptoms and mental health issues. The church that I served, Montclair Presbyterian, had been a kind of safe harbor in 1991 when there were a famous firestorm in Oakland. So when it came to fire seasons in 2018, 2019, I experienced the people who were survivors of the previous trauma as showing their trauma symptoms. They were much more heightened anxiety, much more flashbacks and grief that were coming up because they had the impact of their previous trauma. And finally, at the bottom, eco rage. And I love that Isaias Hernandez defines this as the anger toward colonial systems. And Isaias Hernandez speaks out of an indigenous perspective. Eco-rage is addressed toward the system and the people in power that continue to allow the degradation of the earth. For many BIPOC communities globally, colonialism has had huge impacts on their ecosystems that prevented them from being able to practice their ancient regenerative practices. So feel that feeling like, I know how to take care of the earth and you won't let me. Channeling this eco-rage in the right direction at the people who are responsible for the degradation of the earth is important and sacred work. And channeling it is important too, because there's a risk that young people will just be mad at everybody of a certain generation as if they were all equally responsible. And that's not true. People are not all equally responsible for the destruction of the earth. I've given you a lot. This is the climate emotion scale. It's a really useful resource. Look it up, and I'll also put a link in the chat. I want to ask you, what do you feel? I'm going to put the text in the chat and send you to breakout rooms now. It's going to be about 4 people. You're going to have 15 minutes. And there'll be a timer on your thing. So I want you to just watch that. Each of you gets about 3 minutes and then a little crosstalk, but please don't like advise or fix each other in the crosstalk. Just like appreciate and honor what they've said or say what you connected to. I really want you to speak from the heart. I want you to pick one of these emotions that you personally have experienced. We can't build emotional capacity for other people other than by feeling it ourselves, practicing it. So the point is to deepen our emotional capacity and not to analyze ourselves, but pick one of these emotions that you have felt personally and tell us that story. What was it like when you felt it? So there'll be about 4 people for 15 minutes. So about 3 minutes each shares, and then a little commentary, supportive commentary before we come back. All right, welcome back, everybody. As you're coming back, you can keep your camera on if you're comfortable doing so. Maybe that. Yes. Welcome back, everybody. And yeah, keep your cameras on if you're comfortable doing so. Oh, somebody put a cute one little clip of the climate emotion scale in the.
It's
Oh,
it's
a
the
little
link
different.
that's right there. So if anybody
Okay.
isn't on Instagram or can't get on their phone right now, that's the link to find them.
Yeah. There's the climate emotion scale right there in the chat. So as if your breakout session were a chance to start getting in touch with your eco emotions, I would love to continue that conversation here and have anybody raise your hand and share about one of these emotions, where you felt it, when you felt it, what the story was. Or did you have such great listeners in your groups that you don't need to say anything else? Did anybody do awesome listening in your group? Did you have some like awesome listeners? Don't be shy. Ooh, so somebody put in the chat that sounds. Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
I jumped right in, told the group that I feel like I do have terror trauma because I have experienced flood in my home, and I was flooded in Hurricane Irene. And anytime I go past an area that there's clear cut, I'm experiencing rage and disbelief and trauma again, and knowing that every tree they take down is that much more water that's not going to be consumed. And every street they pave is that much more water that's going to run downhill toward me. So it's pain and fear and regrets and so much going right into that moment anytime I go past something new. And I live in New Jersey, and there's lots of development here.
Yeah. There's lots of development and lots of shoreline development in unhealthy ways. Yeah. Thank you, Anne. Yeah. And I feel that like in the body, like the reaction, the strong reaction. That's how trauma comes up. Anybody else want to share one of these feelings that you have felt? Sarah.
I was saying that I think I slide around through all of these things, just depending what I read or heard or have experienced most recently. But the one that I spoke about in our group was ecophobia, because I had a really distinct call to creation care work about 4 years ago. And the first thing I did was by myself go and start reading books like The Unlivable Earth and things like that, just alone. And I spiraled down so quickly. Just it was too much stress, it was too much anxiety, and it was bad. But then I started doing this work in groups. And that's why I was so happy when you talked about community care and the importance of groups. I think that we really need that in this work to lift one another up, and now and then just go out kayaking or something in nature where it's restorative and we can do that together.
Yeah, reading doesn't need to be a solo activity. It so often is, but there's so much to read that's hard. And by reading it solo, we end up in these really isolated places, and that is very the phobia builds, the fear gets really strong there. Thank you for sharing your experience.
I'd like to share.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
So, my group, Joy and Sarah, were great listeners. And towards the end of our conversation, I think I was trying to talk about the solophilia kind of love for place that I've experienced and how that feels for me very much connected to my family's story of having my grandparents being born in North Korea, fleeing to South Korea during the Korean War, and being separated from their families in a way that primed them to immigrate in their adulthood. And how they kind of experienced, I think, a privilege of not belonging to a place or living in places where they didn't have a kind of embodied history and relationship. And yet that was a pain that they kind of transmitted across generations to me and my cousins, in terms of this kind of anxiety about how to speak about a place that to us is really just exists in our imagination and some kind of stories, but for them has a kind of mixed pride and history of trauma. And I think what's been healing for me as of late has been really trying to claim a sense of belonging attached to place in Willett, where I live, in New Haven, Connecticut now, and really being able to do that in community with folks who I think have developed that over generations, in terms of oftentimes themselves not having the kind of privilege of being able to move so easily because of their economic realities, because of like poverty and a history of redlining, and how it's a kind of, there's like a lot of awkwardness oftentimes, and for me personally, being like the only Asian person in a lot of predominantly white and Black spaces, but it's nice to kind of talk to people about how they have these stories that really allow them to experience belonging in a place, and to like imagine how that's kind of becomes a shared part of our future. Yeah, so that's just something I wanted to share, and how it's felt related to the people who live there primarily as like an entry point, but then it really becomes about both, our public parks and the place holistically, as well as like the built environment and our like the homes and neighborhoods, what they look like in the past.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing that whole journey, like including the displacement and like the kind of nostalgia, like hoping like brings up the biblical texts that come out of exile, like the exile experiences and the longing for land and longing for home, and then also the work to build it, which is very it's a little bit countercultural in our like kind of culture of disposability, or it's kind of like, well, you buy a house or rent a house wherever you can. Like there's not that ethic of investment and rootedness and putting down, you know, plant gardens and eat their produce, seek the welfare of the city where you are. So there's a lot that our biblical text has to say about that, but I really appreciate you narrating that story of displacement and home. Anybody else want to share one of these feelings that felt strong for you? And Jill, if you want to start jumping in with questions, you're welcome to do that too. I know Jill has prepared a couple more.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. First, I want to thank you, Reverend Aho, for bringing all of this to us. This has been a fun and ponderous blend of sitting with, which is a classic chaplaincy approach, and helpful information that we can kind of noodle on. So thank you very much for that. I'm curious to know what made you initially go in the direction of climate change when looking at spiritual crises that youth face. There are some big ones that often take a great deal of our attention as youth workers, and there I think of topics like anti-racism, LGBTQ plus inclusion, mental health struggles, and climate change is certainly one of these, but my bias and my opinion is that it doesn't get quite as much press than others might in these days. So wondering if you can kind of share a little bit of your origin story of how this became so prevalent for you. I'm guessing your roots in California, but just curious to hear a little bit more about that.
No, it's just what was the pressing issue for the teenagers in my youth group at that time, our youth group at Montclair Presbyterian Church. And so the memorable fire seasons were 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020. They were really powerful, big. Each year was a world record, you know, for California, and some were million-acre fires at some point. By 2020, we had thought we had like 3 years of experience, and we're like, okay, so we're gonna have a fire season in October and November, and then it started in July, and we just didn't know what we were gonna do. It started in July. With these enormous thunderstorms. We never have thunderstorms in California. Like I've taken youth groups on mission trips to other places in the country, and they've been like panic attacks when they hear a little thunder. Like we never have thunderstorms here. But so the climate crisis really hit emotionally very hard. And I think also because I mentioned the trauma that our church had from being a safe zone in the firestorm of 1991. 35 families of our church had lost their homes in that fire. And many local, there are many deaths in 1991 as well. So the trauma of that came back up very particularly for me as a pastor, trying to hold that. Yeah, there was this was the topic that was presenting itself to us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and for those who entered late, this virtual background I have right here looks like it might be a sunset, but this picture was taken at noon.
It's an example of pastors seeing what their congregations are in the midst of and accompanying them where they are, and naming that this is the pressing concern for them. Therefore, it becomes part of you as well. So yeah, thank you for that. That's a really beautiful witness. Have you noticed any differences between how young people and older folks approach climate change? Is there something particular to young people's concerns about this, their orientation towards this conversation?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Older people are trying to figure out how to stop this, right? And I really appreciate the organization Third Act, where it's a group of retired, mostly people who are like, this is the final stage of our lives. What are we going to do? All in to stop the climate crisis. Young people have no such delusion that they will be able to stop the climate crisis. Young people are trying to figure out how to live in this world. So it's just a profoundly different orientation. And I think there's some kind of disagreement there when the generations meet each other. But I think it's just important because of their ages and to say, yeah, if you have a life where you've like built and invested and come to a stable place, and now you can devote yourself to stopping this, please throw everything you have at it. But don't ask an 18-year-old to throw everything they have at stopping something that is unstoppable. The climate crisis is not going to be stopped. It's happening. So it's a different energy. And they need to figure out, the youngest people right now need to figure out how to set up mutual aid networks. They need to figure out how to have livable neighborhoods with, they're working on mutual aid networks, and they're working on, just advocacy that matters at the very micro local level. And each person has their own calling, and some people, we're all activists, but each in our own way. And we need to be very respectful of that. Use the passage about the body as one but has many parts. But those are the differences I see between the generations, and I'm guessing that y'all see them too. If anybody wants to hop in with a comment about that.
Yes, please do hop in with comments and throw questions in the chat, whatever you all feel led to do on that, but would love to hear from you. Can you share a little bit more about things you're seeing at the micro level? What is mutual aid network? What does that mean for those of us unfamiliar with that? Yeah, what are you seeing?
I see activists that are like full-time activists, but are spending time on their connections to the other people that are in the work, spending time on things that seem less urgent but more important, on and spending time on, like, we have to have fun, like let's have an art build, and things like that. Trying to bring more like sustainable life into it at the same time as they're calling out extreme messages on their marches and stuff. But to build that network of like, these are the people I trust, these are the people that are envisioning the positive future. All right.
Yeah.
Two interesting things in the chat. Okay.
Yep.
How do you approach this topic in a conservative community? I'm sorry, but I am not the person that wrote that book. And there's some of you have better experience than that. I approach this topic in a very liberal community. I would say, if you can, look for the angles that are local and that are about survival. So somebody mentioned flooding, right? So if there is a risk of flooding in your local ecosystem, that's just self-preservation. It's just smart, but it's collective communal work. So find out where there are local issues that where you can save a life. It's a hypothetical life, but a flood comes along and somebody's house didn't get washed away, you saved a life. Try to do that. Those are my ideas, but somebody else has more expertise here. I want to keep going in talk about the issues will affect them, and then if you're a Catholic committee, read it out loud. Just see, Catherine Hayhoe's book and TED Talk Saving Us might have, she's reaching a broader community. Okay, one of our members pointed out that none of the options for emotions was eco-hope. I've been embracing hopelessness lately. And I want you to consider that. Hope is nice. Hope is pretty. Like everybody wants to have hope. But I wanted you to think on the words of Greta Thunberg, who was saying, the older generations want us to have hope. She said, I don't want your hope. I don't want your hope. I want you to panic. I want you to act like your house is on fire. Because hope in that sense could be anesthetic. It could be like kind of numbing to the urgency of what's going on. So I try not to coach myself to be too hopeful if it's not natural. And I don't have a lot of hope. What I do have is a lot of determination, though, a lot of grit and commitment. And that might seem like hopeful to other people, but it feels different from the inside. It still has that feeling of like, I have positive energy. I want to do something, but I'm not optimistic. We're not going to stop the climate crisis, no matter what great work we do. We're not going to stop it. It's going to keep happening. It's going to roll over the world. It's going to hit the poorest first. Those who have the most money will be able to insulate themselves from the effects and pretend it's not happening. But those with their eyes open will see it is happening. It's not stopping. But there are still great things we can do. And I also think about the Carpathia, as the boat that cleaned up after the Titanic, the boat that heard the distress signal and like put all of their engines on full blast. And they knew that they were not going to get there in time. They knew the boat was going down. But they also knew that they could take people out of the lifeboats, right? So that's the kind of energy I want us to have. It's not the hope of a full victory. It's not the hope of getting everybody off the Titanic onto my ship. But every life saved is life-saving work. And so that's the different kind of hope. It's like everything we do could be saving a life. The trees we plant that will prevent this river from flooding could be saving somebody's life because their house won't get washed away. We just got to keep these things in mind. And I think the grimmer it all seems, the clearer that is that any good thing we do could be life-saving. And that is not hopeful, but it is energizing. So I will put my energy there. I'm just going to keep going through. We have 5 minutes and I'm going to jet through a couple of these questions in the chat. Guidance or ideas on how to make sure we're inviting young people to name and process their earth emotions. Name and process them yourself. Obviously don't bring raw, unprocessed things to the youth, but name your own emotions. Have check-ins. I love to do a regular rose and thorn around the circle. And have earth experiences and then debrief them as well. Go do a a beach cleanup or a river cleanup or something like that. Go pray in a peaceful mountaintop. Try to get them to have the earth experiences in a supportive place where it's okay to feel feelings because you're with people who love you. You know? I don't actually have experience ministering to displaced youth. There are crisis chaplains who have done that, and I am not one. So I will have to, and I'm also not a trauma therapist. So if that is your particular context, you can message me later. So there's a question in the chat based on your experience with ministering to displaced youth, but that is not the right question for me, and I can try to help you find the person that it is the right question for. There's some good book recommendations going in there. Yeah. And Joy says we are going to lessen it. If we don't have hope in that, then all is lost. Yeah. We'll lessen things here and there. There's always people to help. There's always suffering can be eased by kindness in any way. I've run through all the questions there, and people are starting to pop off for their next meeting.
They sure are. In the last 2.5 minutes or whatever we have, I'll ask you a big one because why not? No, but most of us on this call have some leadership over young people. If this is a new-ish topic for a youth group or for a church to consider, where would you suggest they start? Is there a scriptural passage that calls out to you on this subject? Or, would one start with facts and figures in an educational session, or reading a book together, or an organization to partner with? Where would you recommend, first initial steps for a church that wants to be at least engaged in the conversation and wants to educate their folks?
I would start by listening to the people that have the most energy for it. I'd start listening. What are they experiencing? Where are they feeling it? If you want to start with Bible passages, I would get the book Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture by Ellen Davis, which is a positive and beautiful, full of solophilia reading of the Old Testament through the eyes of people who lived on and loved the land and cared for the land. Very helpful. But as a chaplain, I would just start with listening. Where is the energy? We have to respond to the real people. And like I talked in my book about having a college student who was a wildlife biologist, I just knew, like, she's the most deeply affected. Her world, her work is saving endangered species and not saving them, mopping up the wreckage, or, saving the seeds to put in a seed bank for future generations. So wrapping her with support was important, and letting her co-create the climate grief support group we had was really important. So the people who are the most affected get the most say about what to do.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Folks, I'm seeing a couple
and thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, there's things in the chat. Thank you for sharing the Water Spirit Climate Pastoral Care course.
Yep. There are one or two additional questions in the chat I don't think we will have time for, but just a reminder to those, and especially probably a new piece for those who are new to the YMI. I will have a chance to interview Reverend Aho separately, so I will bring all of these questions that we haven't gotten to and make sure that those come out. They will come out in the form of video clips on our website and on our YouTube page, so feel free to keep an eye out for those. And I see we are at time, so I want to thank all of you for attending, and thank you to Reverend Aho for joining us and for sharing with us about this passion. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Pleasure to meet you and see your faces and hear your voices and your chats. Thank you.